Hello everyone, welcome back. Firstly, apologies, it's been a couple of weeks since the last update. As you know, things have been moving a little bit slower than normal, but I have managed to spend a few hours in the workshop, which is really good. It's good to get back into things again. Only a few hours here and there, but it's better than nothing. As you can see, I've had a bit of a clean up of the workshop, moved a few things around, so we're ready to rip back into it and have it that I can work on both cars at the same time, which is the plan. We've managed to fire up the Supercheap AU Falcon again and plug the Motec in, just to get a little bit of a read on what's going on there, which we'll go through. And also, as you can see, we've got FTR3 back in the hoist bay again. We're starting to work through some of the fiddly jobs with that, obviously prior to it getting the major fabrication work done on it. So we'll run through with you now where we're at with everything, and I hope you enjoy. So over recent weeks, we've had a lot of people start to follow the journey of FTR3, and a lot of the following is actually generated not from the car's racing life, but more so its journey on Gran Turismo. Now, if I'm brutally honest, I'm not 100% across the Gran Turismo side of things, what versions it was on, but I know we've had a lot of messages and comments from people reminiscing about driving FTR3 around tracks all around the world on the video game. Now, obviously it was modelled around the 2000 Bathurst livery, and if you look early on, it had the Seton Crompton name on the side of it. So I'm assuming it came out some stage in 2001, given that livery and spec was at the very end of 2000. And it's really cool to know this car's legacy goes beyond just its racing life and and the history it created at that time, but also the Gran Turismo side of things, which is still around today. So the work over the last week or so has been focusing around what we need to change or modify on this car before it gets to the paint stage. Now, we've obviously covered the cage side of it in earlier videos, and we've been through the sheer amount of work that's required to get that back into shape. But there's also a lot of other aspects of this car that has been changed since its racing life. Now, obviously one of those is the engine, which we'll cover off shortly. But we're trying to work through old footage and photos of FTR3 from its racing life, and trying to work out the dashboard layout and some of the internal aspects of the car to get a bit of a read on what we need to do to get it back to that 2000 specification. Now you'll see here, just as an example, I've just put the steering column back in the car. Now that's just sitting there really loosely. But if you have a look at these photos of FTR3 when we got it, the dashboard is, all the switches and the layout is all mounted behind the steering wheel, so up against the Motec screen. And if you have a look at this footage here taken in car when FTR3 was brand new in 2000 at Bathurst, all the switch layout is actually on the center console, and everything else behind the dashboard is recessed back, or sorry, behind the steering wheel I should say, is recessed back level with the dashboard. So there's a lot of work we've got to do to relocate all that switch paneling back where it used to be. And we've got to delete that whole section of the top of the dashboard to get it back to how it was in 2000. Now, it's been referenced a couple of times from people following this journey that dashboard is more of a DJR style that was behind the steering wheel and brought back closer to the driver. So we'll need to follow up on that, but certainly for this restoration, that dash panel section is not going to be required. So you may look at all this now and wonder why we're going to this effort now, not later on. The reality of it is, once we get the chassis done, and when I say done, all the bar work converted back to as it was in the year 2000, we're hoping to get the chassis painted at the same time. So any little brackets and knickknacks that need to go back on the car to accommodate the componentry from 2000 need to go in now before the chassis is shipped off. Now, another example I'll show you of this, if you have a look at the steering column here, which we've just covered, if we go back to that earlier footage once again, you'll note there that runs a standard Falcon indicator stalk, and there's a really nice carbon trim around it. Now, this has been long gone, this has been deleted many years ago, but we need to put it back in the car to do an accurate representation of its 2000 spec. Now, if we go back here and have a look at the steering column, there's absolutely nothing to mount it to. So we need to try and work out how it was mounted, whether it's mounted to the steering column, whether there's bracketry on the cage itself that mounted all this hardware, because it is something that needs to go back in the car to have an accurate restoration. We have worked out that the base of the steering column, so this panel just here that sits on the firewall in there, that is all original. You can see the white paint around the base of the firewall. All that hasn't been changed. It's purely around the steering column and how that mounts, the steering indicator stalk mounts as to where we need to make the changes. Now, again, that DJR style or that later style dash panel has an indicator switch and everything built into it. That'll be no longer required once we make the changes. Now, if we come over just really quickly over to the Supercheap AU Falcon, and you'll see here that car, or this car, actually has the standard indicator stalk on it as well, and it is mounted off the steering column. So there's a chance that we'll just replicate what's on this car, but we'll have a bit more of a look to fully understand where we're at. It's actually broken off the other side for the indicator side of things. That was there originally. When we pulled the car apart, we actually found it under the seat, so that'll all go back to as it was back in the early 2000s as well. So as we go along, we're marking up all the holes in the chassis to work out what stays and what goes. Now, obviously, there's been modifications done to the car over its racing life. We've covered some of that in previous videos, but at this point, we need to mark out what holes get welded up and deleted and what stays. Now, I'll show you here just as a reference. So you've got that mounting point there, which is for your master switch. In the original photos, it actually sat further across toward the driver. So it may very well be that that whole bracket gets deleted so we can set it up as it was in the year 2000. So little bits and pieces like that we need to make a call on now. But one thing that's quite interesting, if you have a look at the side intrusion on the driver's side, there's a few dints there. Now you look at that and go, oh, we should repair that and get rid of those dints. It's obviously happened from a belt being flung out of the way. But if you have a look at this footage here from 2001, well, Steve Richards was in FTR3 at the time, in Queensland being the Queensland 500 Enduro. And you can see here, as the car gets spun and he gets back on track, the sun picks up this side intrusion and you can see that dent's already there. So it was obviously there, well, certainly the end of 2001 or earlier. So little bits and pieces like that, I'm interested to get your thoughts, but my thought process is it was there when the car was racing, so there's no point in tapping that out or filling it up. We need to just leave it the way it is, paint over it in white, and it all tells a part of the car's history. I'm interested to get your thoughts on that one because we do have differing opinions between us, but yeah, I'm certainly along the lines of that markings like that need to stay, and anything else that happened after the car's racing life, like the BA conversion and everything else we've already modified, that does need to go back to as it was in the year 2000 or later. So one other decision we need to make on the car is to try and work out which bar mounts we run. Now, as you can see here, this front bar mount was on the car when we got it. Now, I thought originally that that was just BA and that would be, I guess, thrown away once we put the car back to AU. That setup was actually on FTR3, certainly at the Grand Prix in 2002, which you can see in these photos. And if you go back to 2000 Bathurst with that incident with Paul Morris where the front bar was torn off the car, it wasn't there. Now, obviously, I've got some other photos of FTR throughout 2001, and it looks like that change was made at some stage in 2001. So if we take this off, which is just sitting there, the theory with that piece there is it all stays mounted permanently to the front rails, and then you screw the bar to the front of that bracketry, and it offers support the whole way along the front bar if it gets a hit in the front. Now, the earlier system, which it shows in these photos from 2000, is that the bar slid into these rails and then you only had the two screws on the side which held the bar in place. I'm more tempted to go back to that way, given that's how it was at Bathurst in 2000. So if we do make these changes, there will be modifications needed to the front rails, which we'll do, and that way they're all done. We'll do a mock fit of an AU front bar, and that way, when it's all painted white, it stays immaculate throughout the car's assembly period. Now, the fun bit, the engine. What is it and what have we got? Well, the reality is we're still trying to work that out. The interesting part with this engine is a lot of Glenn Seton's chassis was sold as rollers. So once he was finished with them, and this is dating back to the EL days as well, a lot of them were sold as rollers. So that's why a lot of the cars, when you look at them after their racing life, end up with NASCAR engines or different engine configurations in them. So it isn't uncommon that the engines don't go with the car when they're sold. Now this engine, obviously when we purchased FTR3, this is the engine that was in it. Now it does have, I guess, some FPR markings on it. So if you have a look down under here, it's got FPR heads on it. So it certainly was active in that GSR, FPR or ProDrive transition. So that's a really good start. And a couple of guys that know the engines quite well have suggested that there is some originality from the GSR days as far as the layout goes. But again, there is some conflicting reports. So certainly the airbox and everything and the valve covers, they're all not period correct. So the plan is we'll tear all this down and we'll have a good look at some engine numbers and bits and pieces. Certainly some of the plumbing and markings and everything, which you'll see there, they have date codes back to 2003. Now this car was obviously running in 2003 with David Bernard behind the wheel at ProDrive. So I guess it's not a case that it's ended up with a NASCAR engine or something completely different. That doesn't appear to be the case at this point, which is exciting. So we'll get it all torn down. We'll document every single number that we can, and then we'll enlist the help of some people that know these engines back to front to get a good idea what we've got ahead of us. Okay, so Supercheap Auto Falcon time. So we've had it fired up again, as I said a little bit earlier in the video. She fired up well. We managed to get the Motec plugged in just to give us a little bit of an idea, I guess, where we're at with everything. Now, if you have a little bit of a look here, this is where it all plugs into. So there's two ports. One does absolutely nothing and one reads. So someone that knows a lot more about the system than me will be able to explain why, but that's the port there that we've plugged into, and it gives us a good read. So basically it plugs into that port and then it goes back to just your standard USB fitting to plug into a laptop, which if I grab that just to show you, that's it there. So we got the car plugged in, fired it all up, and it gave us a good read of everything. All the sensors are reading, which is really good. We did find out that the oil temperature sensor is actually reading, although it's not coming up on the dashboard. So there's something abnormal happening there. We need to try and work out what the issue is. It does look like it's been disconnected up under the dashboard for some reason. So before we go and plug everything back in, it wasn't just a matter of it being unplugged, it's actually been disconnected properly. So there might have been an issue there. We just need to try and understand before we plug it back in. But everything else reads, which is really good. We managed to cycle fuel pumps and everything through the laptop, get an idea on fuel pressure. And it does look like at this stage, although the car appears to be running quite rich, it does appear that all the lambda sensors are reading okay, and everything looks to be not completely abnormal. So it may be just a matter that we get the car on a chassis dyno and give it a good run, get someone to set it up properly, and we'll be okay. So certainly don't want to take the risk of getting it leaning off at high revs or something silly and damaging the engine. So that's the next step from here. But we were kind of anticipating that we'd find something really abnormal in the Motec. That wasn't the case. So hopefully a little bit of a tune up from people that know the cars back to front will be the answer, and the car 31 will be back on track before we know it. So we'll continue to push on here throughout the week, and hopefully from here on things will return to a little bit more normality. So we're really looking forward to, I guess, making significant chunks of progress weekly on both the cars. So I'll leave you with a little bit of footage from when we ran the Supercheap Falcon with the Motec plugged in. Shows you the screen and shows you some of the details and what's exactly going on with the car. Anyone that knows these cars back to front, if you can see anything abnormal, for sure, drop us a line. I'd love to hear from you. But hopefully the next update will have a little bit more detail on what's going on, and we'll keep you in the loop. So thanks again for your support. Looking forward to bringing you more on both cars as soon as possible. Thanks again.